Welcome back everyone to part 2 of our One Piece cuisine world building case study. Before we continue into the great land of Wano, I want to take a couple minutes to discuss what the first video was missing. A few of the juicy details I missed were kindly pointed out to me by people in the comments. There wasn't a ton of comments because this is still a very small channel, so there's likely even more that I missed. So I would love to hear anything you guys think is missing from this video or the first one. So let's bring up some of those comments. A couple people brought up things I missed in Water 7. Specifically the gourmet town Pucci connected to Water 7 through the sea train. They frequently did trade with Water 7 and, guessing by the name, they probably sent a lot of food. Which addresses this one particular point I brought up. Rather, all the talk of importation is centered around lumber and materials. There is a lot of talk about the sea trains expanded a lot of new opportunities for the city in general. So I'm guessing there was some importation and exportation beyond just lumber, and it really shows that I failed to mention it. And the second is an anime original episode where Sanji meets a cook who can make some amazing fried rice. And his secret is the special salt that can only be cultivated through the recurring tsunami Aqua Laguna. Also, there is a cover story where Ace befriends a milkmaid and she ends up striking a deal with the Marines to, do business with them. It's very cute. Other than that, there was mentions of devil fruits, but that's a can of worms we'll get into later. Oh, and one last thing, Reverie has nothing much of note. It is a very short arc. We do meet some characters who have a food-based name, stereotypical of the country they parody, such as King Hamburger, King Beer, King Taco, but the only detail I believe to be tangible is how all the high-class royals and rulers eat tiny fancy schmancy dishes, while Garp and his fellow working-class marines scarf down proper grub and finger food. It's a fun contrast. I like it. So now, let's finally talk about the food of Wano Kuni.
Isn't it beautiful, boys? The ancient land of Japan.
I'm hungry. I want a banana.
Stop it, Alvin. Now, there's famous Mount Fujiyama, and look at the pretty cherry blossoms. This is a land that has everything. Rice, fish,
Any
pearl...
bananas?
No, Alvin, they don't grow
I
any...
want a banana.
Never brings...
We had a Japanese banana. It would be so very nice. Want a juicy Japanese banana. Don't want the cherries and rice.
It may come as a surprise to some of you, but food may be a more important element in Wano than it is in our last arc we talked about, Whole Cake Island. In fact, food is so vital to Wano that several characters and even the regions of Wano themselves are named after food and food-related subjects, much like Whole Cake Island. Some examples include Momo, which means fried dumpling, Odin, a dish that consists of several ingredients such as boiled eggs, daikon, konjac, and processed fish cakes stewed in a light soy-flavored dashi broth. Straight from Wikipedia, baby. Otama, a weird part ladle, part soup spoon utensil hybrid. There's the land of Kibi, which is, Kibi Dango. Curry, meaning fresh chestnuts. Udon, which is noodles. Hakumai, white rice. And Ringo, which is apple. It's also very interesting that we find out Zoro is related to the people of Wano. And since his introduction in Shell's Town, Zoro has been using food puns to name his attacks. Most famously his Onigiri rice ball attack. Technically the attack wasn't named until Orange Town, but he clearly used something similar against Axehand Morgan. So I'm not wrong, shut up. The oceans outside of Wano is actually filled with fresh water as opposed to salt water, and as a result it is hospitable for giant koi fish who reside both outside of Wano and in its outer seas. Later on we see some characters hunting and fishing for these koi fish. However, this is no longer an option for reasons we'll discuss soon. Before we're even introduced to the land of Wano proper, we meet one of its citizens, Otama. A spunky ninja in training who can pop kibidango out of her cheeks and is starving to death as I write this. Sadly, she can't get nutrients from her own kibidango and she's dirt poor. She can only afford to eat millet for all but 2 days a year, because as it turns out, the land of Wano is in a dire food shortage due to environmental decay. The weapon factories and mines built by Orochi and the Beast Pirates led by Kaido are devastating everything from the soil to the water to the wildlife. Kaido's top officers are even named after environmental devastations. The calamities Jack the Drought, Queen the Plague, and King the Wildfire. all things we witness across the land of Wano. In such a state, growing crops is impossible. The rivers and wells are poisonous and the meat of the animals is tainted. Although some areas and facilities are exceptions, and we'll discuss them as they come up. Tama literally cries tears of joy when she eats oshiruko, or sweet bean porridge, for the first time. Such a simple meal to her is a treasure in its own right. Luffy's sympathy for Tama comes from a very obvious place. Luffy loves food and most certainly appreciates where it comes from thanks to Sanji. He knows what it feels like to go hungry, and as a child growing up in Fuchsia Village, Luffy spent his days hunting for food with his brothers. They had the freedom to eat whatever they could catch, and it's one of the ways they bonded, whereas Tama can't even have that much. It's no wonder Luffy feels angry on her behalf after she gave him all her rice. And I'm very glad that through the mysterious larger-than-life inherited will and prophecy-esque hullabaloo present in the final battle, Luffy is still fighting for as simple a reason as securing food for his friends, alongside his own dream, of course. And I might be getting ahead of myself, but Tama controlling all the gifters with her Kibidango at Onigashima is incredibly ironic when you consider how food was used to control the prisoners in Udon and the people of Ebisu. Wano is a narrative of industrial pollution creating a declining environment that disproportionately affects the lower class, spreading weakness, malnutrition, and illness. The ruling class even use food as a reward to control the populace. The people reflect the environment in which they live. This created a decline in the ranks of the legendary samurai. A nation that once stood tall in solitude against foreign invaders is now dependent on foreign invaders. Wano, even at its peak, was by no means perfect. Most notably, its obsession with class bloodlines are clear problems. But its strength and independence were its core virtues. Virtues developed in response to a legitimate threat. But because the current shogun is weak and can only rely on others, the country eventually lost those values. This is as much an environmental message as it is one of class and of a nation's spirit being starved of hope and strength. Knowing what we know now completely changes the context of Kinemon and Momo's introduction in Punk Hazard, an arc I skipped over in my last video. They stubbornly refuse help and turn away food for the sake of pride. Even though their nation is starving for food, they aren't ready to accept food from outsiders. And that makes for a solid B-plot for Sanji to reiterate his take on food and pride. And through Sanji, they eventually come to understand that accepting charity is not shameful if it keeps you from a meaningless death, and helps you stay alive to complete your goals and uphold what's important to you. Strength and solitude pales in comparison to proper cooperation. So getting back to Wano, we move on to Okobore Town, the town of leftovers. This town is notable because the people here live off the leftovers of a richer neighboring community, Bakura Town. The only thing it seems they can make for themselves is tea, as we meet Otsuru, an owner of a tea house, and her humble waitress Okiku. Bakura Town is filled with government officials who can afford food from the Paradise Farms, a farm filled with bountiful, healthy foods and water untouched by the pollution of the land. The farms were originally built by Kozuki Oden to feed the people of Kuri, but now it's just a stockpile for the elite citizens and the beast pirates. It's interesting how Oden was the one who decided to build a farm here, because as we know, the state of Kuri was a lawless area before Oden became the boss. Thieves and bandits probably didn't have the skill or resources to farm food in such quantity, so this was definitely a huge improvement to their well-beings, and what would have allowed them to turn Kuri into a proper state of Wano. Now, the Paradise Farms food is given out to a select few and transported in a treasure barge guarded and protected by the Beast Pirates. Of course, as soon as Luffy sees that booty, he steals it, and redistributes it to the people of Okobore. So many types of food appear in this stretch of chapters, and they're all pretty mundane, so I'll just flash them all here. You'll notice a ton of familiar foods alongside a few that are native to Asian countries. A very obvious and suitable choice for Wano. Wait a second. What's this?
There are no bananas.
Unfortunately, that feast Luffy left Okobore Town was promptly stolen by Oden's former vessel Ashura Doji. After losing faith in the Kozuki during the 20 years of oppression, Doji has returned to his thieving ways, stealing food both from the elites and the common folk. He's lost the will to fight Kaido and only seeks to ensure his own survival by stealing whatever food he can get. His selfishness only makes a bad situation worse for everyone but him. And although his faith is rekindled, Him straying from it in the first place was probably the reason he was one of the few scabbards who died in Onigashima, as a narrative comeuppance of some sort. And right after Ashura is introduced, we're blessed with the joy that is Drunk Dragon Kaido. We've long known Kaido was a big drinker, but I don't believe any ale or sake is named in relation to him, so I'm not sure if he's a connoisseur or a lover of any and all drink. I feel like his character could swing either way, you know? The next nice detail is Sanji's noodle stand, or more accurately, a soba cart. Now initially, this was supposed to be a front for Sanji to recruit samurai, but Sanji, being Sanji, instead opted to make sweeter noodles to appeal to the ladies. When the gang sees that Sanji is clearly not recruiting a whole lot of samurai, they suggest that he make his noodles more spicy and less sweet, or something that goes well with alcohol. It's neat that these different demographics and their preferences are brought up. It's pretty rare for the series to point stuff like that out, I think. I can't think of any other instances like it. Alongside Sanji, Kanjo is also selling some scrumptious looking fish using his Delphu power, which is just delightful. After the treasure barge, the clearest example of the stark contrast between the upper class and the lower rung is when we meet Shogun Orochi, partying without a care in the world, telling his guests to eat all they want, as the page slowly zooms out of the beautiful capital to the surrounding wastelands and the factories that made it. It was a very nice introduction, I liked it. Now let's move on to one of the places I find most interesting in Wano's food culture, the Udon prison camp. The Beast Pirates continue to leverage food and lack thereof in interesting ways in Udon. In here, food is primarily an incentive structure. Do work, get food. They're almost treated like animals. They're given immediate but pitiful rewards for their labor. Getting a meal ticket for a completed task. Pulling 5 giant stone blocks only gets you 1 ticket, and 1 ticket only gets you 1 millet dumpling. This system is incredibly harsh for those who are weak, sick, or old, which most Wano citizens are because they're malnourished. But if you happen to be strong, it's not too bad. But if you earn too much, even that might land you in trouble. We also see that in Udon, food can be used as a punishment. As Kawamatsu is held prisoner, he's only allowed to eat poisoned and tainted fish, with the bones removed, of course. The jailers will go out of their way to give prisoners inedible food instead of making sure there's enough good food to go around for the old and sick. It's not a system made for people, it's a system made for slaves. It actually reflects Kao's approach to people in general. If you're strong, then maybe you're worth keeping around, and if you're not, then he couldn't care less if you starve to death. And residing over all the slaves is Warden Queen the Plague, who reserves giant puffles of Oshiruko for himself. It's also here that Big Mom makes her contribution to our discussion of Wano's food. When Big Mom has amnesia, she believes that having kind people starve is an injustice. Even though Big Mom is one of the most ruthless rulers around, she hardly blinks at the prospect of Kaido killing everyone in the capital. I think the justification of these actions is one of the most interesting aspects of Linlin's character. In short, Linlin is a bad ruler with good intentions. Even if she's outright treacherous, evil, abusive, and cruel, she sees herself as a kind queen who wants to create a world where every race can see at eye level. The thought of her subjects or her children suffering affects her. Maybe in a weird, inconsistent way, but it does. A lot of her cruelty and abuse is the result of carelessness and a lack of self-control, not always ill intent. But where Big Mom fails not to be cruel, Kaido is intentionally cruel, and that's why he deprives Wano of food. Where Big Mom lures people in with sweets and the promise of a good life, Kaido beats and starves them into servitude. The weak die and the strong live to rise up the ranks. But if you're strong and refuse to serve him, like the samurai or a few select supernova, he will weaken you until your spirit breaks or your life goes out. It's a very obvious but very effective difference in how they rule that leads to their respective brands of cruelty and control over people. And there are few better examples of Kaido and Orochi's cruelty than the artificial smile devil fruits.
Did you have to do that, Alvin? Singing about a banana like that.
I neglected to mention devil fruits in the first food video because devil fruits are a can of worms unto themselves. They affect the world building much differently than normal food does. And they don't really affect the culture of any particular island. It's certainly worth mentioning that they are highly commodified and sought after across the world, but because of that aspect, they never affect a particular island in a special way. The best example I can think of is Doflamingo leveraging one as a tournament prize. But the fake devil fruits, the smile fruits, have an enormous impact on Wano's culture specifically, while also creating a reliable and sustainable market for devil fruits. With the unknown and seemingly random way devil fruits reincarnate across the world, creating a reliable supply for them would be incredibly difficult. It's partly why they're so valuable. You can never know when one will be available for sale. It's possible we'll see Blackbeard's crew do something along the lines of a devil fruit market, as they have a specific goal of hunting devil fruit users and are the only people who know how to steal them straight from other users. But we'll have to wait and see if that's true. As I'm sure most of you know, the smile fruits are artificial devil fruits, meaning they can be produced efficiently and consistently. And with that comes a proper supply to meet the high demand of devil fruits. Produced by Caesar and Punk Hazard, distributed by Doflamingo Dressrosa, and sold in bulk to Kaido and Wano. Kaido uses these smiles to bulk up the weaker members of his crew, which is pretty interesting because after his boasting on how hockey is the most important aspect to a person's strength, he believes very few people can truly make use of it. So he gives the majority of his crew fake fruits, which are not quite as strong as proper fruits to say the least. Some of them don't even work properly. Some unlucky saps get no powers and a nasty side effect of uncontrollable laughter. In a way, this inhibits the strength of individual crewmen but raises the whole, as even literal helpless fodder can become somewhat stronger. The ones who get powers are called gifters, those who get the side effects are called pleasures, and those who are in line to eat a fruit are called waiters. The best example of an individual being inhibited is without a doubt Killer. Already a powerful fighter who ate a smile fruit only to become a pleasurer. An individual can only eat one devil fruit, any more and they'll die. If Killer ate a real zone fruit, he could have grown far stronger. And if he ate a mythical zone, which is even stronger than a normal one, he could be exponentially stronger. But that potential has been taken away from him. And when Queen learns that no more smiles can be produced, he uses that as an excuse to treat the waiters and pleasurers as expendable. Or at least more expendable than they were before. It's a strong example of the upper crust of Kaido's crew having little faith in their followers, a lot like Kaido himself. Before we move on, there is one more aspect of devil fruits worth talking about, and that's how devil fruits are often used to illustrate inherited will, most notably through Sabo, Big Mom, and Luffy, but because this is a world building video, that is a little off topic. Instead, I'm going to focus on Yamato, Pell, and Chaka. We see Yamato eat a mythical dog devil fruit that represents a guardian deity of Wano, and this is a fact he made aware before she even ate the fruit, meaning this particular fruit likely belonged to another person who protected Wano in the past, maybe even a whole line of them. We also see Pell and Chaka use the Falcon and Jackal zones, animals considered guardian deities of Alabasta. It's just as likely that Pell and Chaka's fruits are passed on from guardian to guardian as Yamato's fruit is. We've recently learned that zone fruits have a will of their own, so it makes me wonder whether this will have something to do with the fruit's origin, or if a devil fruit can be influenced by its past users. Like, could Marco's Phoenix fruit choose to keep reincarnating on Sphinx Island because Marco's desire to protect it is so strong? Devil fruits are still a huge mystery, but I can't help but think about how the story will continue to integrate them into the theme of inherited will. And since I brought up Yamato, I'll mention now that it's really cool that Yamato ate his devil fruit because he was starving, in similar circumstances to Momo and the people of Ebisu. Oh right, Ebisu is what I'm actually supposed to talk about. Orochi, being the cruel little stinker that he is, decided not to throw away the leftover scraps of the failed smile fruits, but instead feed them to the starving populace of Ebisu town. Even after realizing that these scraps had nasty side effects, the poor people continued to eat them, because it was better to live cursed than to die hungry. This very obviously mocks the idea of putting on a brave face, which many Wano characters, cursed or not, do pretty quickly. The people of Ebisu and maybe even all of Wano have been pretending that things were okay for so long they lost the ability to express anger in the proper way. And now we're gonna get to the Udon flashback, where we see what Wano looked like when the land was flourishing. In particular, I want to talk about the Mountain God incident. When Kinemon steals a white boar that was taken from its family, its parent, the Mountain God, attacks the capital. The boar represents nature defending itself against people who don't respect it. But after Kaido's arrival, Wano's current state of nature is too weak to defend itself like it used to. paralleling the samurai and how they've lost strength to malnutrition. We also see Odin hunting for carp barehanded like a real man. So yeah, we can say for sure the carp was at one point very safe to eat. And this next point really has nothing to do with the plot, but I've had discussions about this with some people, and it's kind of interesting. As we know, along with the food, there's a huge water shortage in Wano. But at the same time, we see heavy rain at Tokage Port and the heavy snowfall of Ringo. This could actually raise a bit of a question. Could the people of Wano use the weather of these locations to secure more drinking water? And the answer is obviously yes. Rainwater couldn't be contaminated the same way river water can, and snow should be the same. If you're willing to go through the trouble of moving it out of Ringo to melt, at the very least. But these questions never occurred to me while reading because even if you could take advantage of them, they still wouldn't be enough for the giant population of Wano. Still, it's an interesting little question that I have seen others bring up, so I think it's worth mentioning. Also, this should go without saying, but I'm gonna mention it anyway. The character Odin, who's pretty important, I think. He likes to eat Odin, and he dies by being boiled in a giant pot, much like you would cook Odin. It's very, very cute. And our last topic is the Fire Festival, a yearly holiday meant to celebrate the union between Shogun Orochi and Kaido of the Beast Pirates. This is the one day a year the masses of Wano are afforded abundant food. And this is also the one day a year that the ban on alcohol is lifted. And predictably, carnival food is floating around in abundance. Cotton candy, candy apples, shaved ice, squid, sausages, and takoyaki, all good albeit mundane stuff. And at Onigashima, nearly every member of the Beast Pirates can be seen with a drink in their hand before the battle even starts. It's kinda comical. And that should be the bulk of Wano's food. When talking about Wano and its food, it's pretty obvious that there's far less to glean about the particulars of the fantasy setting, and far more to talk about on the narrative side. So much so that calling this a world building video almost feels like a lie. I just kept that title for consistency's sake. But it's pretty awesome that there was enough to talk about to fill a 20-minute video. And I wouldn't attribute that to Wano's length, considering how Act 3 gives us so little. As for Wano's future, I'm sure that the new Shogun's leadership alongside Green Bull's aftermath will lead Wano back into a state of stability, where well-behaved kunoichis in training can eat their fill every day. Thank you all so much for watching, like and sub if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. It'll be a long time before there's enough material for me to work with to do a part 3, unless I get a ton of comments telling me about stuff I missed, which I still want to encourage all of you to do. So again, thanks for watching, and see you next time.